You always hear about the men, the feared dons and ruthless enforcers who built empires through blood and loyalty. But what about the women beside them? Not fleeting lovers or mistresses, but wives caught in a world where power came at a cost. Some disappeared in the silence, while others faced impossible choices. Join us as we explore what happens to the wives of mafia bosses. Victoria Di Giorgio Gotti never wanted the spotlight, but being married to John Gotti, men have followed her everywhere. Unlike the wives who embraced the life, she kept her distance, raising her children away from the chaos as much as she could. That didn't mean she was blind to it. She knew the rules, what to ask, what not to ask, and when to turn away. Even though she never handled business, she understood the weight of the name she carried. And when Gotti was finally locked away for life, that weight didn't disappear. If anything, it got heavier. Money was never a problem while he ruled the Gambino family. Status shielded her from the ugliest parts of the mafia life. Or at least that's what people thought. But once John was gone, the illusion fell apart. Legal battles drained her family. Her son John Jr. spent years fighting federal cases, and the Gotti name became a headline instead of a shield. There was no escaping it. The past had a way of showing up, in courtroom transcripts, in reality shows, in the whispers that followed them through New York. Victoria never sought power, nor did she try to rewrite history. She simply lived with it, carrying a name that would never be truly just hers. Unlike Victoria Gotti, Josephine Posca Colombo knew the cost of marrying into power, but knowing didn't make it any easier. Her husband, Joe Colombo, built his reputation on defiance and challenging the government. He turned himself into a public figure, and some would say he got too bold for his own good. She watched him rise, watched the world take notice, and then watched everything collapse. Even though she was never the face of it, she felt every consequence. The day he was shot at an Italian-American rally, she sat in the hospital waiting for news, knowing life had just changed forever. After the attack left Joe paralyzed, she became the quiet force holding the family together. As long as he'd been in charge, money, respect, and security all seemed endless. But after he was silenced, everything grew unstable. The same people who once called every day slowly stopped calling. Power shifts within the Colombo family made things worse, but she had no say in any of it. Yet she carried the weight of it, raising her children under the shadow of a name that no longer held the same fear or respect. Although the mafia world moved on, the past never truly let go. Friends disappeared, money ran thin. The once proud image of Joe Colombo became nothing but a memory, and Josephine had to learn how to live in a world where his name no longer commanded anything but whispers. If you think Josephine Posca had it tough, wait until you hear about Antoinette Casso. Antoinette Casso wasn't blind to the life she married into, but knowing and living it were two different things. Her husband, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, ruled through fear, smiling at dinner, making people disappear by morning. Even though she knew what he did, she never asked questions. It wasn't about denial, it was about survival. As long as he came home, as long as their life remained untouched, it was easy to pretend the world outside their doors didn't exist. But when the walls finally caved in, there was no time to prepare. One day, she was the wife of a man who ran the streets. The next, she was married to a fugitive, watching the empire crumble from the sidelines. When he turned informant, the betrayal cut deeper than any headline could explain. Not just because he broke the code, but because it meant everything she thought was untouchable had been a lie. Money disappeared, friends vanished. There was no dramatic escape, no moment where she walked away free. The name Casso still carried weight, just not the kind that offered protection. And even though she never fired a gun or made a deal, the world had never let her forget whose wife she had been. But what happens when she doesn't just outlast the empire, but rather helps bring it down? That was the case for Arlene Brickman, a mafia mistress who grew up worshipping the mob. The money, the power, the men who walked into restaurants like they owned the city. It all fascinated her. As long as she stayed close to them, she felt untouchable. The moment she got involved, she realized loyalty only worked one way. She wasn't protected, she was used. And when debts piled up and threats turned real, the men she once admired turned their backs. She could have run, she thought about it, but disappearing meant leaving behind the only world she knew, and she wasn't ready to be nothing. So she did the unthinkable. She flipped, not for the law, not out of some moral awakening, but because the men who promised to look out for her had made it clear they wouldn't. Even though she knew what had happened if she got caught, the choice had already been made for her. She was done being afraid. But the thing about betrayal, especially in the mafia, is that it never fully ends. The past lingers. Even though the men who once controlled her world are gone, their ghosts still exist in whispers and glances from strangers who recognize her name. Maybe she got out, maybe she won, but as long as her past is written in ink, she'll never know if the next door she opens will be safe. But not every mafia wife looked for an escape. Some knew exactly what they were signing up for and embraced it. Not out of naivety, but because of love. Take Camille Francis, for example. She didn't marry a saint, she knew that much. But when she fell in love with Michael Francis, he wasn't just some street guy making a name for himself. He was a rising star in the Colombo crime family, someone who could open doors and make things happen with a single phone call. And she should have been afraid, but love doesn't always work with logic. Even if she told herself to be cautious, she fell anyway. The life came with everything: luxury, whispered conversations, and silent understanding that there were things she shouldn't ask about. She played her role, she smiled when she needed to, but as long as Michael was in, so was she. When the government finally came knocking, when prison became real, she had to decide who she really was. Would she wait? Would she walk? She chose to stand by him, but not without cost. The weight of being a mafia wife doesn't disappear just because someone wants out. Even now, years later, when Michael's built a new life, she carries pieces of the past. People remember, they always do. Even though she never wore the title of boss, she felt the pressure of one. And when she walks into a room, some people still look at her like she's part of something bigger, like the past never fully let go. Maybe it never will. Some women endured by saying nothing at all, a skill Dolores Castellano knew better than most. Her husband, Paul Castellano, wasn't just any crime boss, he was the boss. The kind of man who dictated the rules of an entire empire while she stayed in the background, knowing exactly when to speak and when to simply listen. But that didn't mean she was blind. She saw the looks and heard the whispers, things that weren't meant for her ears. And even if she wanted to believe she could separate herself from his world, she knew better. When he was taken out, gunned down in the street like just another target, her life cracked open. The power, the wealth, the security, all of it vanished in an instant. And what was left? A name, a legacy, a weight she was never truly asked to carry. But as long as she was Dolores Castellano, people would remember. Friends became distant, enemies became bolder, and the world that once feared her husband had no obligation to protect his widow. Some women in her position rebuild, some disappeared, but Dolores, she had no choice but to walk forward, even if every step meant carrying the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. Even now, years later, the name Castellano still lingers, spoken in low voices, never forgotten, and she still wears it, even if it no longer offers protection. Because once you're part of that world, stepping out is never as simple as closing a door. Do the sins of the husband ever stop haunting the wife?